think it was 2 or 3 years ago on a family trip where we took Angie and Dietrich and Madeline that we listened to The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Classic literature. I had managed all my life never to read it, but we listened to it on this trip. Tom Sawyer was a very interesting character. He stood the test of time. I do not remember this particular part from listening to the book, but supposedly Tom Sawyer said that the only two Bible characters he could remember were David and Goliath. Probably almost everybody has heard about David and Goliath. They may not know much about them, but they've heard those names. Bill T. Arnold gave this summary about our text today, which is 1 Samuel chapter 17. David's dramatic victory over Goliath has become a classic for all the ages. It contains all the elements of great literature. Many of us became familiar with the details of the story in our early childhood, and with good reason. Who among us has not felt the terror caused by a bully like Goliath, the giant of a man who boasts as though he is invincible and appears to have the goods to back up his bravado? And who of us can resist the innocence of the young shepherd boy who simply cannot understand why this culprit is permitted to defy the armies of the living God? It is the story of sling and stones versus sword, spear and javelin, of defiant military aggression versus purity and faith, of right versus might, of tall versus short, and of youth versus maturity. We saw last Sunday that David, as a young man, was anointed to be the second king of Israel. Several years are going to pass before he officially becomes king. It is soon after he is anointed that he is called into service to play the harp for Saul, who is troubled. He goes back and forth between home and Saul's palace. When he's in the palace, he's playing the harp. He goes back home, he tends sheep. The setting today is that of war between the Philistines and Israel. The Philistines were basically settled in the western part of Canaan, close to the Mediterranean Sea. Israel is further to the east, but for many, many years they have been in conflict. The Philistines are the aggressor. They are now at war again. Now Saul had had some victories against the Philistines earlier, but they're back at war again. Here they are in the Elah Valley. The Philistines are on one side, up in the hills or mountains, and Israel is on the other side. There's the valley between them with a narrow stream bed running along. It's wartime. David's brothers, his older brothers, are there fighting. David is probably between the age of 17 to 19. The youngest military age was 20. We come to 1 Samuel 17, and we are introduced to Goliath. Goliath, we think of as a giant. The tallest human ever recorded outside of Scripture was 8 feet 11 inches tall. Goliath may have been as much as 9 feet. All depends on what those measurements mean. Goliath was not a giant in the sense of stories like Jack and the Beanstalk. However, he was an exceedingly tall man. I have known a few individuals over the years, and if they're 6'11", when you come up to them, they seem very tall, don't they? You have some concern about some individuals when they go through doorways. Are they going to make it? We also need to remember that Saul, the king, was described as being head and shoulders above the rest. He would have been a pretty good match for Goliath, but he was not interested in being that match. Goliath considered himself to be invincible, and the Israelites shared his estimation of the situation. Chapter 17 of 1 Samuel. The Philistines had gathered their armies for battle. Israel was also there. There's the description of Goliath, of his height. There's a detailed description of his military equipment. Quite a bit of detail here. He was well prepared for battle with his defensive armor. The chest was covered, the back was covered, even his legs were covered. He had an assistant who might have also been a tall person to carry his shield in front of him. He had a javelin that was huge. The head of it may have weighed as much as 15 pounds. But he was a big man. Notice down at verse 8. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." This was occasionally practiced. Rather than everybody going to war with each other, everybody fighting with each other, one or perhaps a few individuals would be selected to each side to do the fighting, and that would determine the outcome of things. In this case, Goliath says, "Hey, I'll fight any one of you. If I win, you serve us. If you win, we serve you." Verse 11 says, "When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid." It was a frightening scenario. It was frightening in part because Israel forgot who they belonged to. They forgot God. Saul had had victories early in his reign against the Philistines and others because he realized God was on his side. Then Saul had gone his own way, had rejected God. Verse 12, we come to David. We're told a little bit about him, kind of a refresher. But he was the son of Jesse. Jesse is said to be old, advanced in years. David has a number of older brothers, and 3 of them are in Saul's army. They are present. David is the youngest. As we've said, he goes back and forth between serving Saul and taking care of sheep at home. Now, for 40 days, twice each day, Goliath came out and gave this challenge to Israel. "Send one of you come out and fight me." This had gone on for a long time. Jesse tells David to go to his brothers who are there at the front to take food for them and to take some food to give to the commander. Jesse says, "See if your brothers are well and bring some token from them." And David comes upon this scene. Philistines over here, Israel over here. He's on Israel's side, of course. He gets there and he hears Goliath's challenge. He comes to a grasp of what's going on here as he listens. Now, Saul has even made a great promise to anyone who will go out and fight against Goliath. He will have his daughter as wife. He will have many advantages. David hears this, and David is unhappy. First, his brother is upset that David has showed up. He just thinks David has come along to watch the fight. But David has been sent by his father on a mission. And it's interesting, verse 29, those of us who are younger siblings, well, that's not me, I'm an older sibling, but the younger sibling can identify with this. David says, what have I done now? David hadn't come to watch the battle. He had been sent by his father. But he hears Goliath make this challenge. It bothers him. He sees Goliath and the Philistines for what they are. They worship false gods. David worships the one true God, as Israel is to do. And so David says, well, I'll fight Goliath. David, about 19 years old maybe. And Saul says, you're not able to go against this Philistine, to fight with him. You're but a youth. Goliath's been a man of war from his youth. Verse 34 and following, David said, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. David said, the Lord will deliver me from the paw. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. David's a young man. He's not an experienced soldier, but he has experienced combat. There was a man who said he was out walking or jogging, and someone was coming toward him and said something about a deer up ahead. Then the man got to wondering, did he say deer or bear? A lot of difference there. If there's a deer ahead, okay, I can handle that. If there's actually a bear ahead, I think I'll turn around and go the other way. Think about this. Would you rather encounter a lion, a bear, or a big man? Bears and lions are in many ways a greater threat than even an experienced soldier. But David says, God was with me when I was confronted by the lion and by the bear, and he will be with me now as I go against Goliath. Saul said to David, go and the Lord be with you. Then we read that Saul offered his armament to David. You get the impression that David put all this stuff on that didn't really fit. Also, he had never used such things before, and so he wasn't going to use those. He says, I cannot go with these where I have not tested them. He took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. Goliath several times is called the Philistine. Philistine, Goliath, starts to move forward toward David. His shield bearer is in front of him. With all of that armor that Goliath has on, I believe it is estimated weighed 125 pounds. It weighed a lot. He's not as free to move as David is. He has defensive protection. The Philistine looked and saw David. He disdained him. You're just a youth. Now, it does say that David was ruddy and handsome in appearance. But Goliath says to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" Goliath cursed David by his gods. Then he said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." Notice David's reply. "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David says, "You've got all these weapons, but I've got God. You have defied the one true God." Goliath says, "I'm going to feed you to the birds." David says, "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and cut off your head. I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth." Why? That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Well, Goliath is walking toward David. David runs quickly toward the battle line. He doesn't have all that stuff on. He can run. Put his hand in his bag. He took out a stone. He slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank deep into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone. Verse 50 says, David had no sword in his hand. But he ran over to Goliath. He took his sword, he drew it out of its sheath, he killed him, cut off his head with the sword, Goliath's own sword. When the Philistines see what has happened, they run. When Israel sees what happens, they chase the Philistines, chase them for several miles, and attack them. They then come back and plunder the Philistines' camp. Verse 55, as soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said, "Whose son is this youth?" Abner says, "I don't know." Saul says, "Find out." Now that kind of perplexes us in a way. Didn't Saul already know who David was? Well, we're not really told just what that relationship was. Again, remember that Saul was troubled by the evil spirit. He may have forgotten. At any rate, Saul inquires about David, finds out he's the son of Jesse, and David will be pressed into greater service towards Saul after this. And so we see the challenge of the giant, of Goliath. Just send one person out to fight against me. We'll settle it this way. We see the reaction to the giant. On the one hand, it is fear from Saul and the army of Israel. But we see the response of David. R.W.L. Moberly said, "The story of David and Goliath is in essence a story of David trusting God and of God delivering David." J.G. Baldwin said, that this story is an outstanding example of the Lord's power to give victory against dramatically overwhelming odds in response to faith and courage. Gerhard von Rad said, David's speech has been called a high water mark in the series of Old Testament utterances on the subject of faith. David basically says, who does this guy think he is? God is on our side. And then we have the defeat of the giant. He is defeated, yes, with a stone to the forehead, but he is defeated by God. Now, Saul is still technically the king, but at this point, David has become Israel's leader, and that will grow and grow. We face giants in our life. It can be problems at work, problems in the home. It can be disease, injuries. We face obstacles in life. Don't know that any person is ever obstacle-free. How do we face our giants? We learn from David that the key is to confront them not in fear, but in faith. God grants us victory over our Goliaths. Our faith and action are keys to the battle. As David says, the battle belongs to the Lord. Yes, it's a familiar story. It's a powerful story, a true story, of how young David showed how faith in God matters. It is not so much that we have a strong faith in God, but that we have faith in a mighty God. He can deliver us.